Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Tur Bet Yosef. And we will be learning tonight Shavua Tov Chag Sameach, and we'll be learning Siman Taf Resh Ayin Bet. I'd like to open with a few comments. First, I appreciate all the feedback, and please do comment, send me feedback, send me questions and suggestions. I'd love to hear it. Thank you to Dr. Pinhas for pointing out halachot Beta Bechira about the menorah's placement, and he did agree that the location is probably not Ma'akev bin the Bet HaMikdash. Secondly, a few nights ago, I did offer a Oreo Sufganiya for a prize for a challenge question. I'm glad that nobody responded because once I got to Berman's Bakery on the first night of Hanukkah, I saw that they only had nougat and halva flavored sufganiyot, which are only for people that have taste buds prior to 1970, Israeli taste buds. And thirdly, we mentioned the Rivat. It said that we do make a bracha on a minhag. The Rivash said we make a bracha on the Neros Chanukah and the Bet Knesset, and he also mentioned the bracha on Halel on Rosh Chodesh. Now, if anybody was listening, they'd say, "Hey, Halel Rosh Chodesh." Well, we hold the Maran holds like the Rambam that we don't make a bracha. That's the minhag of most of the Sfaradim. However, if you look at the Poskim and the Rishonim and the Ramah, there are various minhagim, and most Ashkenazim do follow the Rosh, the Torah, and the Rivash seems to be holding like that there is a beracha on minhag, just like Halel. We'll progress to Siman Tav Resh Ayin Bet, which begins with a sugya in Masechet Shabbat. The Gemara is discussing whether or not kavta zakukla, whether or not once the candle goes out, are you required to light the Hanukkah candle after it goes out? And the Gemara says there's a braita that supports this opinion. The braita says, "Ka hama ash tichle regel min hashuk." Braita says that the mitzvah of Hanukkah is when when the sun sets until the regel min hashuk. The Gemara explains is that there would be wood carriers, that they were still around the half hour, and the Rishonim said it's a half hour, they were still in the streets half hour after a certain time. The Gemara says no. There's no proof from here for Kavta Zakukla. Rather, the Braita is teaching us the deen. Which deen? The Eid lo adlik matze madlik. That if a person didn't light until this time, they can continue to light. Meaning, if a person did not light at the right time, however, they can continue for another half hour. It doesn't mean, it's not talking about Kavta Zakukla. It's not a proof for that opinion. The Gemara says, Inami. I have another answer. L'shi'ura. What does the shi'ura mean? You have to put enough oil in the candle for this half hour. And the Rishonim also explained that after this half hour, you could put out the candle, you could use the shemen, so on and so forth. So basically we have a Gemara that, by the way, mentions that when we light the Hanukkah candles, it has to be for a certain time. And it's teaching us the laws of whether to light. Now the Ramban, really, when the Gemara has two answers, usually the second answer is the answer brought l'halacha. Here we find that both the Rif and the Rambam bring both of the answers. The Rambam is in Perek. The Rambam is in Perek Revi'i Melchot Chanukah Halacha Hey En Madlikin Nerot Hanukah Kodesh Tishkach Hamam Ela Im Shkiata Lo Me'achrim V'Lo Makbin. We'll discuss this a little bit later. Shachach O Hizid V'Lo Hidlik Im Shkiata Hama Madlik Beholech Ad Shedechle Regel Min Hashuk. וכמה הוא הזמן? חצי שעה או יותר. עבר זמן זה אינו מדליק. The Rambam says that if a person didn't light at the right time, they still have a half hour. Called it shachach or hizit, which is how it sounds like in the Gemara. The Rambam adds, וצריך ליתן שמן בנר כדי שתהיה דולקת והולכת עד שתכלה רגע מן השוק. You have to put enough oil in the candle to light for a half hour. That's the opinion of the Rif and the Rambam. However, the Rosh says something very interesting. The Rosh says that since the Gemara says Mikan ve'elach avar hazman, that time passed if you didn't light at the right time, Hilkach afapi shemetaretz tirutz acher ra'ui la'achmir v'ladlik ner Hanukkah b'techilat halayla. The Rosh says that even though the Gemara is going to say another answer, still you should light at the beginning of the night. It sounds like from the Rosh that the real answer is that you put enough oil in, like the second answer in the Gemara. However, you should be machmir like the first answer. It sounds like the Rosh is choshesh for the first answer, but it's posik like the second answer. The Tur brings a machloket whether or not after the time you could light. The Tur says that the time of the night of lighting is all night long. It seems that the Tur is learning like the second answer is Zikar. However, he says, and not like the Rambam. The Tur is arguing with the Rambam that the Rambam says avar azman et no madlik. The Rambam says after a half hour you don't even light, which sounds to mean that there's nothing to do. You missed the time. That's it. Don't even try. Bet Yosef says, why is the Tur ganging up on the Rambam? The Rosh, the Tur's father himself, says also to light afterwards, and the Rosh says only from Safek, which means that the Rosh agrees to the principle of the Rambam that after the time there is no mitzvah. However, just be Safek to light. And the Bet Yosef brings that there's a Tosfot like this, and therefore the Bet Yosef sounds like he's going with the Rambam that after this time it's only from Safek. Now we all know the rule in Halakha, Safek brachol akil, and it would sound like that since the Rambam holds after a half hour you don't even light. Obviously not with a bracha. And even the Rosh says only light is from Safek. It would sound like even the Rosh wouldn't tell you to make a bracha. Maran, when he brings this halakha to Haruch, doesn't talk about the bracha. He brings the lashon of the Rambam that you shachach or izid v'lo idlik madlik v'olech ad shedichlei regel ben hashuk, which is a hatzi sha'ah, because there's still people in the street, and there's obviously persum hanes when the people are in the street. Hilkach tzarich litem b'shemen kazeh shiur. And he says the nafkamina in natam bayoter yachol lekabota lachas shura zman. After a half hour, put out the candles. V'chein yachol l'shtemesh l'ora ahar zeh azman. The oil is not considered oily oil, and it's mutar for use. Miu, Maran says, hani mile lechatechila. This is only preferable. Avar zeh azman v'lo idlik adlik v'olech kol halayla. Maran says that you can light all night long. Question to Maran, is he saying kol halayla with the barakah or without a barakah? Mishnah Berurah brings opinions that say with the barakah. However, some want to say that Maran would never tell you to make a barakah on a tafik. That seems to be the opinion of Bet Yosef. Today we have another discussion whether or not people are still in the streets. Obviously, people are in the streets till later at night, and therefore there's a major discussion in the Ahronim how times are different from then, and therefore you could light even with a barakah later at night. It's important to note also that the Rosh himself says that even though you should light at the beginning of the night, however, since we light in the house and there's no care ela lebnei habayit and la the Rosh himself says, as well as the Darkei Moshe and the Ramah bring here, that since they light in the house, as we mentioned earlier, that there's many opinions that say they light in the house, and that was the custom. And therefore, the Ramah says here, Yesh omrim shebezman hazeh shemadlik bifnim eno tzarich lezaher ladlik kodem shetichlei regel hashuk. However, the Ramah agrees, Mikol makom tov lizaher gam bezman hazeh, because as he brings into the Darkei Moshe, there are opinions that say that even nowadays one should light at the proper time. Our next question is, what's the earliest time to light? So what is the proper and the earliest time to light? Bet Yosef brings three opinions on the matter. First, he brings the opinion of the Ran. The Ran says that when the Gemara mentions the mitzvah, the Gemara says that's the right time to light. However, you can light earlier. However, he says the opinion of the Bahag and the Rambam seems to say only from the sunset and onwards. And here we come to the opinion of the Rambam, which is not only the Rambam, it's the Bahag, it's also many other Rishonim that say that the time to light is from sunset. However, the Bet Yosef mentions that the Tur is careful to say Sof Shikyat Hama, which means the end of the sunset. What's he referring to, the end of the sunset? He refers us to a Tosafot in Perek Bamei Madlikin, which discusses the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says that there's two sunsets. One roughly 58 minutes after what we call sunset, and then the second final sunset, which is 13 minutes later. This is the source of the opinion of the Shitat Rabbeinu Tam, which holds that nightfall is only 72 minutes after our sunset. And seemingly the Bet Yosef is holding like that opinion that says Sof Shikiyah. Therefore the Aharonim write that the time according to Maran is like the Tur, which is Tzeta Kochavim. That's where the opinion of Nightfall Tzeta Kochavim comes from, even though there is what to argue in the Lashon of Maran here. And Maran himself does bring in one halakha, seemingly like the Rambam, he says Shkiyah, and then he says another opinion of Shkiyah. There is another discussion on that, but we want to make things as clear as possible, and we don't want to get everyone involved into the big discussions in the Aharonim. Nevertheless, the Bet Yosef does bring the opinion of Mahari Abu Hav, and which is brought in the Chod Chaim, that if a person has a dire situation, if they must light early, even on the weekday. So obviously we know that on Friday night, everyone's lighting early. Everyone's lighting before sunset. We don't want to be Mechalel Shabbat. However, even on the weekday, Mahari Abu Hav and the Chod Chaim bring, and Maran also in Shulchan Aruch brings it, that if a person has a necessity, he can light from after Plag Mincha, which is an hour and a half before sunset, or an hour 15 minutes, 75 halachic minutes before sunset, because just like Havdalah, if a person on Shabbat afternoon needs to make Havdalah, he could make it after Plag Mincha. He could even pray out of beat of Saturday night on Shabbat afternoon within 75 minutes of nightfall. Therefore, they shouldn't be different. And seemingly the reasoning is they're both mitzvot that are done. And in dire situation, we won't say that the mitzvah Hanukkah is more hamur than Havdalah or Arvit on Motzei Shabbat. And therefore, you can do it early. They do point out that you have to put on a lot of oil in the candle because you do want it to last the entire shiur of a half hour after nightfall. So you have to, if you're lighting from the beginning of Plag, which is an hour 15, you'd have to add in about an hour, 45 minutes of oil burning time. Therefore, it could be have persumanis during the nighttime. Another discussion is whether or not nowadays that we light inside, do we have to light on time? The Tur brings two opinions. He brings a Tosafot that say no, since we light in the house, and the main mitzvah is for those in the house, not necessarily to light on time. However, he does bring another opinion from the Sefer HaMitzvot that says you should light on time, and which is the Ikar Zman, and the Tur adds on his own, and he says that we, as we mentioned, the Tur's place to light, like we mentioned in the early shur, it seems that from the Tur he used to light inside the courtyard, however, it would be visible to the street. But the Tur says since people on the street do see it and it's noticeable, or maybe something like a window, therefore the Tur says we should light at the right time because we want people to see, and there is a mitzvah for people to see on the street. As we've mentioned, the Bet Yosef doesn't really go with this, and Shulchan Aruch doesn't mention this at all. However, as we've said, the Ramah does hold of this, and therefore the Ramah says that it's not necessarily necessary these days to light at the right time. יש אומרים שבזמן הזה שמדליק בפנים אינו צריך להיזהר להדליק קודם שתכלה רגל מן השוק מכל מקום טוב להיזהר גם בזמן הזה. Our next discussion is something very interesting that I just realized that it's actually discussed in the Poskim. What if a person missed a night of lighting? A person was traveling, wasn't feeling well, for whatever reason, a person missed the night of lighting. Does he miss the whole holiday? So I thought, for sure not. I never heard of such a thing. However, the Beit Yosef actually discusses it, and he brings that both from the Maharam Berotenberg and from the Rashba, it can be understood that you missed it all. However, the Beit Yosef brings sources to prove that it's not this way. It's not like a Sefirat HaOmer where there's opinions that hold that if you miss one night, you miss the entire. It brings the Shuvad Maharil, which he calls Shuvah Ashkenazit. He also brings the Rokeach, and he proves that there's no such thing in Nerot Chanukah that you missed the entire mitzvah. If you missed one night, you missed one night. Or only that night you lost. Each night is its own obligation. He brings that it's not like Timimot, and therefore, the person is Chayav. The person could ask, 1 second, maybe because we add Nerot Hidur, it would mean something else. And he brings from the Shuvah Ashkenazit, the fact that we light 1, 2, 3, 4 every night doesn't mean that if you miss one night, you missed everything. The extra candle is a Hidur, and therefore each night we're obligated to light one, and therefore every night has its own obligation. How about if a person missed one night? should he add candles the next night? The Bet Yosef does bring that there's Orchot Chaim that says that in Lunil they had this story, and their poskim did say to add candles the next night. Obviously, rely on the bracha you made that night, on the fourth night. Let's say on the fourth night you missed night number 3, so do 7 candles. Don't say bracha because you already said the bracha on the fourth night, and therefore you should add. However, the Bet Yosef brings from Rokeach. He also brings some other poskim that it's not like Tefillah and Kirat Shema where there's a concept of Tashlumim, and he would also say that in the Rashba and the Maharab, the way he explained it, that you should not add candles, and the Rama also brings that there is an opinion that says you do add. However, the Rama says in the Varav even he's specific like the Aguda and the Maharil, and that's how the Rama ends off the Siman. Maran and the Rama also add off the same way. Maran says Vimavar kol lela v'lo yidlik en lo tashlumim. Can't make up for it. However, and the Rama adds v'lelot acherot yidlik kumo sh'ar bnei adam af al pi shelo yidlik barishona, light as everyone else, even though you missed one night. Shavua tov and v'sorot tovot to all.